Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Matt Swenty. I'm here with my co-authors, Ben and Chris, as you just met. So you give them all the hard questions and I'll do all the presenting today. The first presentation here is on teaching methods used in concrete education. So this is really a big overview, some background, so just some basics of engineering education in general. So to begin with, this is just a first in a series. As Chris just mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different topics that are coming up. You see this outline here to the right. It's 10 more topics in addition to this one. And the goal is really on this presentation to set the stage for the coming presentations that follow. And so this entire series is designed to provide background, ideas, and a forum to share different teaching techniques and ideas. I'll provide an overview, a very general overview right now, but please stick around and watch the other presentations. I'm excited to see more from them and our other co-authors here because there's some really great information coming up later on today. So just to take a step back for a minute. At the onset of this process, like Chris mentioned a couple years ago, we tried to just sit back and try to start defining what the problem is and what the basics are. Learning has been defined as acquiring and retaining knowledge. And that's just a very theoretical definition. We wanted to define some of the techniques that make this process more effective, both in the short term, but also in the long run for our students. The process boils down to the professors communicating with students. And there are many different ways of doing this, as many of you probably already know. But at the end of the day, we don't all always see this the same. And that's part of what we're trying to do here is just share different techniques, because what the professors, some of us may have made this mistake, I've made this mistake where I think it's a very simple process. It's just a couple building blocks. It's something so straightforward. And the students see this as a major, massive mountain in their way, a big struggle to get there. And so part of this is just learning the different communication styles and techniques and how to overcome that. So, we're in concrete education. A lot of this is like construction, the construction process. The tools we use are the practices and methods of teaching a subject. That's the formal definition of what we call pedagogy. Students build upon or construct previous knowledge as they progress through classes and master a subject. However, educational theory says these learning styles and motivations of the students, it's going to affect how they learn, and we have to be aware of that. And so this process of constructing knowledge is not trivial, and it's certainly not a prescriptive process by any means. So to take a step back even further, we'll say, let's look at some of the traditional or classical methods, common teaching techniques that maybe you use, or maybe you learn from. Many of us learn from these methods and maybe still use them. The lecture format has been around for a long time and it can be used effectively if it's structured very well. We talk about deductive learning when we think about a lecture that is then progressed into a series of example problems or different exercises that we work together. And this method is highly valued. It's used a lot, but sometimes literature tells us it might be overused. So the question today is, what is the best method, or what's the best way of working with our students and helping them as they progress in their education? So the next question is, well, how do we get them to ask the question why? How do we get them to start really engaging with their education and really jump in and become owners of their education? And we want them to learn how to ask that question and learn, why am I doing this? Why am I taking this class? How is it practical? How does it connect to my education and to my world? And so research shows that when students do this, they're more interested, motivated, and have longer term gains. And so that's really all the background of what we're trying to do here today is get that connection and start helping our students really ask the question. And so you may think, okay, Matt, what's the answer? Where's the right answer? Give me the 1, 2, 3 step and we're done. And the reality is that, as many of you know, it's not a simple answer. I think it's important to note that we're going to present a whole bunch of methods here today, and there's not a perfect answer for every situation or for every person. The key is to be balanced, I think, and flexible. I think many of us have learned that in the last year. I've learned all kinds of new teaching methods in virtual settings in the last year that I hadn't used before. And the reality is you got to be flexible. So you want your students to make those higher order connections and retain knowledge. And to do this is likely going to require you to use a number of different techniques in different situations. So we've established we want our students to learn. We want to do it effectively. We want to try different pedagogical methods to accomplish this. So my goal now is to start introducing you to some methods, or maybe reminding you of methods. Again, maybe some of you know most of these, maybe you've never heard of them. That's okay. Either way, it's just a baseline of knowledge. I must admit, though, I'm not going to cover everything. In the papers, the special publication, we have a lot more details. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more depth and complexity. So again, please reference the other presentations and the papers to come. Now, I throw this table in here. I know it's a fundamental faux pas not to put a table with this much information in, but I do that on purpose in this case, mainly because in the paper we have a lot more discussion and descriptions and also references for all the different methods that we're going to look at today and that are in all the different presentations today. We've ranked them and what we perceive to be the complexity of analysis. You know, how much time does it take? What resources are required? And then how difficult is it to implement these various methods? And so this is, again, just one of the tables. There's, I think, about 3 different ones like this in the paper. So I recommend you look into that. And if you want to really dive into any of these methods, there's a lot of good resources in there that we've compiled. And so that's just a little caveat there as you move forward. So moving forward from here, the first set of examples I'd like to go through are really some of the what we call the simpler or quicker techniques. You know, think, pair, share, peer discussion, interactive quizzes, a minute paper, and muddiest point. Now, all these have some variations. They're all a little bit different. Maybe you've tried them before. But the idea is they're primarily short and they're methods of breaking up a class. You know, many of us have seen that if you go on and lecture on and on for many, many minutes or hours, you're going to lose people. You know, 15, 20 minutes. And a lot of times you need to make some kind of break. You need to make some kind of change. And so these tend to do that. They provide a little break in the middle, 5 minutes or less, to reflect, review, and clarify the topic being presented. And this provides the students to think about and really engage in what they're doing. And then also, it may give the professor feedback depending on how you frame these little breaks. So here's 3 examples, really quick examples, an interactive quiz, for instance. So for a presentation like the one we're doing here today, I'm sure many of us have done online type education in the last year. So I might stop and say, okay, think back to the methods you've used in the past. And now take 30 seconds. Write down an example of a classical learning method that you used. I might wait 30 seconds or so and then have you either share or write it down and submit it. Or in an online environment like this, maybe go in and do a poll function or something along that manner. The second example, muddiest point. A very similar approach, which is similar, but it's a little different in the sense that you're going to ask the students to write down something, you know, in the last 7, 8 minutes since I've been presenting. What just doesn't make sense? What have I not clarified? And write that down. Or maybe, again, fill out a poll. And from this point, you can collect that information and either come back the next period, or if you have instantaneous data, you can look at it right then and there and address that issue. So you're not moving forward building upon a topic that you just haven't clarified and isn't straightforward. A third idea here is peer discussion. This is a method that works great if you can break up your class into smaller groups. Now, I know this has been done effectively with small class sizes and large class sizes, so don't think your class size will limit you. There's different methods and ways of doing that. But you may stop and ask the students to go through and talk to one another. Talk about what the last topic was, whether it might have been detailing and reinforced concrete. You know, what do you understand about that? How does that work? Where do you look for the references in the ACI manual? And then you as a professor can walk around for a couple minutes and interact on a more personal level and maybe collect some feedback and address any issues that at that point in time aren't clear. Now, again, all these methods, there's different variations. The students are really just you're wanting them to think about and engage the topic and then possibly collect a little bit of feedback. And so these, I say, simple methods because this isn't something that's necessarily going to change your whole style of teaching or completely revolutionize what you're doing. This is a great way to just break things up for a couple minutes and quickly get back to what you're doing with, again, a small break, 5 minutes or less. Now, the next category I'm categorizing these as intermediate techniques, and there's 3 in particular I'm going to highlight right now. Again, there's more in the paper, but these techniques are not necessarily harder, but a lot of them require more planning. They're more than just a simple question like some of the simple techniques. The 3 listed here are field trips, physical artifacts, and skeleton style notes. Now, each of these methods provides some form of visualization, which we found is very helpful, at least in engineering education, quite a bit. There's a lot of references to this. You know, field trips are something maybe you've done before, but I would emphasize a field trip can be very, very simple. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process or half a day. It can be as simple as just walking down around your building or off campus and looking at something, an application of reinforced concrete. I show one picture on the lower right-hand side right here. This was one of our dormitories a couple of years ago. It had some serious deterioration. We've used this for a field trip a number of times in a couple of our classes, and we can just walk down there and see that in 10 minutes round trip. Now, if you have more time, of course, or if you have a lab setting, you can do something more complicated. In the center and the bottom, this is an old railroad tunnel. It's one of the oldest tunnels in the United States, 180 years old, and it has some really interesting old reinforced concrete and masonry applications inside. And so again, different environment, different setting, and it becomes a memorable experience that you can see some really interesting examples. Of course, artifacts, this can be as simple as bringing in a piece of rebar or a chair, or as complex as building a model or doing something more complicated like that. But again, just bringing something in that breaks up class, that students can see, they can touch, they can feel, they can just go through and visualize in a much more personal way. And I also would suggest don't underestimate the value of a very pointed story, something from your experiences that might help them remember the topic at hand. The next style of intermediate applications I would suggest is skeleton style notes. This has multiple names. It's not the only way it's described, but guided notes. But it's just a very organized handout or a digital file that guides the students through the lecture. This can take a lot of time to set up ahead of time, but once you implement it, isn't nearly as hard. This one is quite a bit of guidance. I picked one here that has a lot of guidance. There's a picture. It has a series of different examples, equations, and also some fill in the blank. Now you can make this as complicated as this or very, very simple, just a basic outline. But I like this personally because it provides good diagrams and pictures, so students aren't sitting there trying to draw their pictures. They can engage with it, annotate the diagram, annotate the subject, and ask questions and interact more. And it gives you more time than sitting there trying to draw a really nice, neat diagram. Now, this takes us to some of the advanced techniques. This is the last category, and by no means am I going to tell you a whole bunch on these because each of these is a paper and a presentation in and of itself easily. Most of these categories will require you to change an entire class, if not a series of classes to implement. So these are definitely more advanced. It includes problem-based learning, project-based learning, service learning, case-based teaching, experiential learning, and flipped classroom. Now, in some of these methods, you're going to have to go through and really do a lot of homework and really think about how you can develop a problem or a project that fits in with your class and meets the objectives, or find a case study, which is a really good way of going through and making a point. They require a lot of higher level thinking on your part and also the students, and it may even bring in multiple courses they've previously had. So it's a good way of implementing and integrating different topics. And of course, the last one, flipped classroom, that's going to require you to completely transform the layout of your classroom. I tried this for the first time this last year with myself in one of my classes, and it's a really neat technique. It works good in some situations, but it was a whole lot of work. Here's a couple of quick examples. You can look at a problem. If you look at problem-based learning, for instance, you might task the students with design a reinforced concrete beam and then make sure it meets certain criteria. Now, in project-based learning, the bottom, the middle of the screen here, this is a project we had our students do for a number of years. They went through and built a small structure, a parking garage, and had to go through and use knowledge from statics and structural analysis and surveying and put everything together as a project. In service learning, we did that a couple of times. Upper right-hand side, this is one particular example where we designed a pavilion, had a reinforced concrete foundation, and had the students go out and survey and actually build the project. Now, this is very similar to what some of you may do for capstone type classes, but it really engages the students and it provides them with a real world experience because they have a client and they have to actually finish and it has to be right. And then experiential learning is always a lot of fun if you have the resources in the labs. Upper middle of this picture, you'll see a couple of students there that are working on a reinforced concrete beam where they actually went through and built and then are testing. So they're experiencing what it's like, what ductility looks like, what deflections look like. And so again, that's an experiential learning activity that has worked in our classes. So at the end of the day, regardless of the method attempted, I know we went through a lot of those really fast. There are a few lessons learned that I would suggest to think about. One is be flexible and realize things are going to change, students will change, and nothing's going to work perfect every time. Another point I would make is don't forget that regardless of what method you use, there is a body of knowledge, and this is important maybe for your accreditation or for your students that take the FE exam. So don't lose sight of the big picture and make sure you hit all your key objectives, your learning objectives. For those that are new to teaching or want to try something new with a class, I would suggest smaller incremental changes rather than completely renovating and retrofitting everything. A huge overhaul may not be appropriate. Now, there's a time for that. There is a time for that. I don't want to say you should never do that, but early on in your career especially, I would probably do smaller incremental changes. Also recall students are all different. Get to know them, learn about them. That's very important when you're developing the projects and talking about different problems and the problem statements. And have fun. I hope your excitement permeates through your lectures and your class. I know it's a real privilege and a lot of fun to work with students. And the older I get, the more I realize that their energy is also a lot of fun just to work with them. So learn from one another and have a good time. So in conclusion, this presentation was quick, I know, and was just a very, very general overview of these different techniques. So please stick around, please watch the following presentations and reference the upcoming special publication. There'll be a lot more depth that I was able to provide right here in 15 minutes. But I've truly enjoyed my time getting to know students, and I find it extremely rewarding. So I hope you get as much enjoyment out of it as I do. Good luck, and also please share your ideas and your teaching techniques with us. I can't wait to learn from you all, because that's what's going to make me better, and I appreciate that. So I believe we're all a lot better as we collaborate together. So again, thanks for your time today. Have a great time and enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. So we've got a few minutes here for some questions. A couple ways we can do that. There is a Q&A part down at the bottom of the screen. If you want to type a question, I'll be happy to read those and Matt can respond. Or if you'd like to raise your hand and ask that, we can give you speaking options and you can ask the question directly. Matt, I'll ask one. What is the most complex thing you've ever tried to do? And what was your biggest lesson learned from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And barring the last 2 semesters, I think up to that point, project-based learning was certainly a challenge, just because when you throw students into a project and you try to really implement that, at least from my experience, is you're really bringing in other topics from other classes, and it's very complicated, and there's multiple right answers. And so to me, that has been very challenging, just because it requires so much one-on-one attention in a lot of cases. But at the same time, I found the best gains for my students have been doing a really project-based situation. So that's been the most challenge, I think, up until, like I said, last semester, I tried flipped classroom for the first time, and there were some really good benefits of that. I didn't like everything about it, but that was more, I think, as I've learned from the educators, more of emergency learning and emergency teaching than anything. And so that might be a little different. So that's probably my misperception, but that's my thought at this point. Thanks for the question, Chris.
All right. Any other questions from anyone for Matt? We got one question here from Ali. I'm going to let you talk. There we go. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. This is Ali Atiya, Assistant Professor from University of Kufa at Iraq. My question about assessment methods. I think this is the big challenge we face in the pandemic situation. So what is your opinion about that issue?
Just assessment in general, is that what you're asking? I'm sorry.
Assessment methods, especially for the design courses, because it's more complex than others, as you know. Yeah. We can't use multiple choice and something like that in courses. Yeah, no, that's very true. And I certainly don't have all the answers to that. I can give you my experiences in the last year is that I've learned a lot new techniques of working with students and interacting with them virtually. And that's the bottom line. I think I've spent a lot more time texting and using different techniques. I think someone's going to use a hover cam coming up. I discovered a hover cam, and I use that for office hours now all the time, because I can look at different examples and pull up my textbook right there in front of them. But that's the best example I have right now as far as trying to do assessment. But as far as actually assessing the students, if that's what you mean, that's also been a challenge. I've been lucky at my school. We've been able to meet in person at least partially the entire year. So I can still do some of my assessments at least somewhat in person. But a true virtual, 100% virtual is a challenging setting. And so I've just tried to use different techniques of communicating with the students, just trying to communicate. That's what I always tell them is we got to communicate, even if we're not in person, the best we can. But I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. Maybe Chris or Benny has some examples they could provide too. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we got time for maybe one more question. See, we got one from Arash. I'll go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and ask your question. There we go. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Hi, this is Arash Ramatian from University of Houston downtown. Thanks for the presentation. I think it was a very interesting subject, especially when we're talking about how to handle the evaluation of the courses through the pandemic. Specifically, we had a hard time. Probably it was first experience for most of the world to do everything virtual for most of the universities around the world. I think that subject it's very important, and I think if the committee spend more related subjects in this regard, how to handle the design courses for the instructors to make a robust evaluation and assessment. I think that would be an interesting subject. Down the road, probably we're going to have a new trend for the teaching courses, online, virtual things, which is all new for everywhere, everyone.
That's a great comment.
Thank you.
I agree.
All right, so I think that'll kind of conclude this presentation. Matt, again, thanks for doing that.